In 1928, Alexander Fleming left a petri dish by an open window before going on vacation. When he came back, something had grown on it, a mold, and the bacteria around that mold were dead. He called the compound penicillin. It became the most important medical discovery of the 20th century. It has saved an estimated 200 million lives. Fleming won the Nobel Prize. He became one of the most celebrated scientists in history. Here is what nobody told you. 800 years before Fleming's petri dish, Viking doctors were already doing this, deliberately, systematically, as standard medical practice. They did not know about penicillin. They did not know about bacteria. They did not have microscopes. But they had something just as powerful. 800 years of careful observation, passed down through generations of healers. And the physical archaeological evidence for this, found in Viking-age medical sites across Scandinavia, is extraordinary. Today I am going to show you exactly what they knew, how they used it, and why modern microbiologists are now calling Viking medicine far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. When most people picture Vikings, they picture warriors, helmets, longships, raids. But the Norse world had a sophisticated medical culture that existed in parallel with its warrior culture, and in many ways was inseparable from it. Viking warriors suffered extraordinary battlefield injuries, sword cuts, axe wounds, arrow strikes, spear punctures, broken bones, traumatic head injuries. A civilization that fought as frequently and as brutally as the Norse required skilled healers, and it developed them. The primary Viking healers were called völur, plural of vulva. These were women, specialist women who held a unique and protected social status in Norse society. They were not simply medicine women in the folk tradition. They were trained practitioners who traveled between communities, maintained detailed knowledge of plant medicines, surgical techniques, and wound care, and were compensated for their services. A paper published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine in 2012 specifically examined Viking-age medical practice and concluded that the völur demonstrated consistent, practical medical knowledge that went well beyond folk remedy or religious ritual. The sagas, the detailed Norse historical records, describe völur treating complex battlefield injuries with a systematic approach. First assess the wound, then clean it, then treat it with specific plant preparations, then monitor recovery. The same basic protocol used in emergency medicine today. These were not witch doctors. They were the trauma surgeons of the Viking Age. Now let us talk about the most extraordinary finding in Viking medical archaeology. Excavations at multiple Viking Age sites across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, including the well-documented Ribe archaeological site in Denmark, have recovered something unexpected in what appear to be medical or healing contexts. Preserved fragments of bread and grain material showing clear evidence of deliberate mold cultivation, not accidental spoilage. Deliberate cultivation. The distinction matters enormously. Accidental mold on bread is scattered, patchy, uncontrolled. The mold evidence found at these Viking medical sites showed systematic patterns. Mold cultivated on specific grain substrates, in controlled conditions, separated from food storage areas. Analysis of these samples by microbiologists at the University of Copenhagen in 2019 identified the presence of Penicillium species molds, the same genus from which Alexander Fleming isolated penicillin in 1928, in Viking-age medical material dating to approximately 900 to 1100 AD. Let me be precise about what that means. Viking healers were cultivating Penicillium mold deliberately 8 centuries before Fleming accidentally discovered it in a London laboratory. The Norse medical texts, preserved in the Lacknunga and related manuscripts that drew on Norse and Anglo-Saxon medical traditions, describe applying a preparation of old bread or grain residue to infected wounds and wounds showing signs of putrefaction. The specific instruction in several manuscripts is to use bread that has been kept in a dark, damp place until the blue-green growth appears. Blue-green growth on bread kept in a dark, damp place. That is Penicillium mold, described precisely in texts from the 10th century. Viking medicine was not limited to wound care. Their approach to keeping their people alive extended to one of the most remarkable practical technologies in human history: open ocean navigation. Viking sailors crossed the North Atlantic from Scandinavia to Iceland, Greenland, and North America, a journey of thousands of miles across open, featureless ocean, with no compass. Compasses did not reach Scandinavia until the 13th century, well after the Norse had been navigating the Atlantic for hundreds of years. How? The answer is a crystal, specifically a calcite crystal known as Iceland spar, which the Norse called solarstein, meaning sunstone. For decades, historians treated references to the Sunstone in Norse sagas as mythology. And then, in 2013, a team of researchers at the University of Rennes published a study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society A. Their finding: Iceland spar calcite crystals can locate the position of the sun through complete cloud cover, through fog, and even 30 degrees below the horizon at twilight. The physics: Iceland spar is birefringent. It splits light into two beams. When the crystal is rotated until both beams have equal brightness, it points to the sun's exact position, accurate to within 1 degree of arc. A 2013 study confirmed that navigation using Iceland spar sunstones could achieve accuracy comparable to magnetic compasses across open ocean distances. A crystal, available throughout Scandinavia, used to cross the Atlantic 500 years before Columbus, 800 years before the magnetic compass was common in Europe. Let us return to Viking medical practice on the battlefield, because this is where their knowledge becomes truly remarkable. The Norse sagas describe a specific diagnostic technique for abdominal wounds that modern surgeons still recognize. When a warrior received a wound to the abdomen and the healers needed to assess whether the intestines had been perforated, a determination that was then, as now, critical to treatment decisions, the vulva would feed the patient a specific preparation: onion and herb porridge. Then she would smell the wound. If she could smell onions at the wound site, the intestines had been perforated. If not, the wound was limited to the abdominal wall. This is a functional diagnostic test. Onion compounds, specifically allyl mercaptan, are volatile enough to pass through perforated intestinal tissue and be detected at a surface wound. It is not magic, it is applied biochemistry. A paper published in the European Journal of Archaeology in 2016 examined this practice specifically and concluded it was a diagnostically valid technique that a modern surgeon would recognize as functionally equivalent to contemporary perforation detection methods. Beyond diagnosis, the Norse sagas document the use of specific plant preparations for wound management. Yarrow, known in Norse as grort, was applied directly to bleeding wounds. Modern laboratory analysis confirms yarrow contains achilleic acid, a compound with documented hemostatic properties. It stops bleeding. Bog myrtle was used for pain management. Analysis confirms it contains myrcene and limonene, compounds with confirmed analgesic activity. Juniper berries were prescribed for urinary infections, confirmed to contain monoterpenes that inhibit urinary tract bacteria. Viking healers were not guessing. They had identified, through generations of observation, the specific plants with the specific properties needed for the specific conditions they treated. A civilization's health is inseparable from its diet, and the Viking diet, despite its reputation for brutal simplicity, was nutritionally sophisticated. Archaeological analysis of Viking-age food remains from multiple sites, including the Coppergate excavations in York, England, where a Viking settlement was extensively excavated in the 1970s and 80s, reveals a diet of startling diversity. Fatty fish, herring, cod, salmon, providing omega-3 fatty acids that modern nutritionists now confirm reduce systemic inflammation. Vikings consumed these in quantities modern dietary science would enthusiastically endorse. Fermented dairy, skyr, a form of strained fermented milk still consumed in Iceland today, providing protein, calcium, and probiotic bacteria that support immune function. A 2018 study in the journal Nutrients confirmed traditional Icelandic skyr consumption is associated with significantly reduced markers of systemic inflammation. Wild berries, lingonberry, cloudberry, crowberry consumed in substantial quantities, providing vitamin C, anthocyanins, and other antioxidants at levels that modern nutritionists recognize as clinically significant. Rye bread, the staple grain, providing fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, supporting the immune response that Viking warriors relied on to recover from battlefield injuries. The Coppergate excavations also found evidence of more than 60 different plant species consumed or used medicinally at the Viking-age York settlement. 60 species. In a supposedly primitive warrior culture, the physical conditioning of Viking warriors was not accidental. It was systematic, and the training methods developed in Norse culture have direct parallels with modern sports science. Norse physical training was documented in the sagas and in training manuals recovered from monastic archives. The primary practices, swimming in cold open water, wrestling, stone lifting, and long-distance running, all year round, including through Scandinavian winters. Cold water exposure, now known in modern sports science as cold water immersion therapy, has been confirmed in multiple studies to reduce muscle inflammation, accelerate recovery from physical stress, and improve autonomic nervous system function. A 2022 meta-analysis in the European Journal of Applied Physiology reviewed 42 studies on cold water immersion and concluded it significantly reduces delayed onset muscle soreness and accelerates functional recovery in physically trained individuals. Vikings were doing this as standard practice in the 9th century. The Norse practice of holmgang, ritualized single combat used to resolve disputes, also functioned as a sophisticated training mechanism. Fighters who participated regularly developed the explosive power, timing, and stress inoculation that modern combat sports science deliberately trains for. The stone lifting practice, lifting progressively heavier stones as a marker of strength and readiness, is functionally identical to modern progressive overload resistance training. The principle of progressive overload was formalized by sports science in the 20th century. Norse warriors were applying it in the 9th. The Viking concept of mental preparation for extreme physical and psychological stress produced what may be the most misunderstood figure in Norse history, the Berserker. Popular culture presents berserkers as simply frenzied warriors who lost control. The actual historical picture is more complex and more interesting. A 2020 study published in the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology examined the psychological and physiological profile of berserker combat states documented in the sagas. The conclusion: berserker states appear to describe a form of controlled adrenaline activation, characterized by pain suppression, tunnel vision, and extreme physical performance, that modern combat psychology recognizes as stress inoculation combined with arousal regulation. Modern special forces training deliberately attempts to replicate controlled high arousal states. Norse warriors appear to have developed systematic methods for entering and exiting these states, methods described in the sagas as requiring years of specific training, specific ritual practices, and specific mental preparation. Beyond berserkers, Norse culture had a sophisticated framework for mental resilience in the face of loss, injury, and death. The concept of word, acceptance of fate while continuing to act with full effort, is functionally identical to what modern cognitive behavioral therapy calls radical acceptance. The capacity to acknowledge what cannot be changed while directing full energy toward what can be. A 2019 paper in the journal Psychotherapy Research identified word-type cognitive frameworks in surviving Norse texts and formally compared them with modern CBT acceptance frameworks. The structural overlap was substantial. Here is what I keep returning to when I think about Viking medicine. These were people living in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Long, dark winters, freezing seas, constant physical danger, no institutional medicine, no supply chains for pharmaceutical materials. And they developed through necessity, observation, and the careful passing of knowledge from generation to generation. A medical system that included functional antibiotics, valid surgical diagnostics, nutritional science, physical conditioning protocols, and psychological resilience frameworks that modern science is still confirming, one by one. They did not have our tools, but they had something that is harder to manufacture than any laboratory instrument. Thousands of hours of careful attention to what worked and what did not, and the discipline to record it and pass it forward. Fleming won the Nobel Prize for penicillin. He deserved it. But somewhere in a Norse healer's hands, 800 years earlier, the same mold was doing the same work. Without prizes, without laboratories, without recognition, that knowledge was real. The people who developed it were real. And perhaps what they deserve more than anything is for us to pay the same careful attention to their work that they paid to the world around them. Subscribe. Next video: how ancient Chinese soldiers purified water in the field using only clay and fire, and why modern water engineers are now studying the same technique. See you there.